All right, so today we're diving into something pretty wild. This whole thing with Elon Musk and, it's Elon Musk and Megabase, and this battle they're having over skilled immigration. It might seem kind of strange at first, like, what does building rockets have to do with, like, who gets a visa and all that? But I think you'll be surprised how connected it all really is. It's not just Silicon Valley stuff. We're talking about potential impacts on, like, your job, your investments, like basically the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is it's not just about numbers. We're talking about different, like, stories about the American dream clashing here. And the result of this whole thing, well, it can totally reshape the economic landscape for years to come.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. We got Elon Musk, right? The guy was like obsessed with going to Mars, and now all of a sudden he's super vocal about bringing the best and brightest to America. It's not your typical, like, the immigration debate you see on the news. We're talking about highly skilled workers, H-1B visas, the kind of talent that Silicon Valley, like, totally depends on.
Yeah.
So the question is, why is this such a big deal for Musk now?
Well, you got to think about it. Musk's whole empire is built on, like, constant innovation, right? Like, electric cars, space travel, even all the stuff he's doing with AI. It all requires, like, the top talent, the best of the best. And he's been saying for years that America needs to be like this magnet for the best minds out there if it wants to stay ahead of everyone else in the world. He even compares it to building a championship sports team. You want the best players, right? Doesn't matter where they come from.
Okay, that makes sense. But is talent really like a zero-sum game? Like, if America gets some brilliant engineer from another country, does that automatically mean that other country loses? I mean, the stuff you sent me suggests it might be more complicated than that.
Exactly, and that's where the AdJ perspective comes in. It kind of adds another whole dimension to this whole puzzle. They see all this through a different lens, one that's focused on protecting American jobs and wages. We see things like the H-1B visa program as, well, a potential threat, like a way for companies to, undercut American workers by bringing in cheaper labor from other countries.
So it's not just about keeping people out. It's about protecting those who are already in. For them, the American dream is tied to making sure American citizens have opportunities first.
Exactly. And that's what creates this head-on collision with Musk's vision. On one side, you've got Silicon Valley, right? Pushing for this global talent pool to fuel innovation. And then on the other side, you've got a pretty big chunk of the American public worried about their livelihoods and the future of their communities.
It's like a classic example of what we talk about on capital gains, right? Big business going up against populist anxieties. And those ripple effects, they're going to be felt way beyond Silicon Valley boardrooms. But then we throw this curveball into the mix. Shriram Krishnan. Talk about someone who's walking a tightrope.
Now, Krishnan is where things get really interesting. You've got this guy. He's an Indian immigrant. And he's a successful tech entrepreneur. But he's also a former Trump appointee. It's not something you see every day, that's for sure.
Yeah, he was focused on AI policy in the administration. But at the same time, he's been a pretty big advocate for H-1B visas, especially when it comes to attracting top AI talent. It's like he's trying to bridge this gap between the tech world and the Megabase, which, let's be honest, is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, it definitely speaks to this growing tension within the Republican Party. You've got figures like Musk and Krishnan on one side, pushing for a more global and tech-driven approach. And then on the other side, you've got this very strong populist wing that's really focused on an America First agenda.
This is a tough spot to be in, for sure. And, this whole internal struggle within the GOP, it's happening at the same time as that. Some pretty big changes in the global economy, right? I mean, technology is changing everything, from how we work to where we work, things like automation, artificial intelligence, remote work. It's creating this feeling of uncertainty, even fear for a lot of people.
Yeah, it really does feel like the ground is shifting under our feet, and it's hard to know what to hold on to. People are worried about their jobs, their wages, what the future holds. And then you throw this whole debate about skilled immigration into the mix. And it's no wonder things are getting so heated. Right, and the sources you sent, they highlight how this isn't just some abstract policy discussion, It has real consequences for people's lives. We're talking about livelihoods, families, entire communities. On the one hand, you've got this argument that attracting global talent is, like, crucial for innovation, for keeping America competitive in this rapidly changing world.
Right, but then on the other side, there's this very real concern about what happens to American workers. If companies can just bring in people from overseas, we're willing to work for less. It's like this constant tug of war between the need for progress and the fear of being left behind.
And the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah.
If we don't find a way to get this right, we risk making existing inequalities even worse and creating even deeper divisions in society. It's not just about economics, it's about social cohesion, about what it means to be an American in the 21st century.
You're right. You're hitting on something really important here. The MAGA movement's anxieties about immigration. They often come from this sense of cultural change, this feeling that traditional values and ways of life are being threatened. It's about identity belonging and who gets to define what it means to be part of the American story.
Exactly, and that's what makes this debate so challenging. It's not just about numbers or policies. It's about these deeply held beliefs and anxieties about the future. And the sources you sent really show how this is playing out in very personal ways for people on both sides of the issue.
So how do we even begin to bridge this divide? Is there any way to find common ground in a debate that feels so polarized?
Well, some experts suggest that maybe focusing on reforming the H-1B visa program itself could be a good starting point. There's criticism from both sides, you know. You've got those who say it's too easy for companies to exploit foreign workers. And then you've got others who argue that it's too restrictive and that it prevents truly exceptional talent from coming to America.
So it's broken. But in two completely opposite directions, how do you even fix something like that?
It's all about finding that balance. Some proposals focus on increasing transparency and oversight, making it harder for companies to abuse the system, and ensuring that wages are protected. Others suggest maybe moving towards a points-based system, similar to what Canada uses, where individuals are evaluated based on their skills, education, and experience, regardless of where they come from.
That sounds like a more merit-based approach, prioritizing talent and expertise over just filling a quota. But wouldn't that still potentially displace American workers? I mean, if someone from overseas is simply more qualified.
That's a valid concern, and it's why some people argue that just tweaking the H-1B visa program isn't enough. They say we need to think more broadly about how we prepare the American workforce for the future of work, which is changing rapidly whether we like it or not.
So we can't just be reactive, trying to protect jobs that might become obsolete anyway. We need to be proactive, equipping people with the skills they need to thrive in this new landscape. But what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, some of the sources you sent point to investing heavily in education and retraining programs. We need to make sure people have access to affordable, high-quality training in fields that are in demand, like tech, healthcare, renewable energy. We also need to promote lifelong learning, recognizing that people may need to change careers multiple times throughout their lives.
So it's about adaptability, about fostering this mindset of continuous learning and growth. But isn't that easier said than done? Especially for people who are already struggling to make ends meet, who may not have the time or resources to invest in further education.
That's where government policy comes in. We need to provide support, whether it's through tuition assistance, tax breaks for retraining, or even wage subsidies during training periods. It's about investing in our people, recognizing that human capital is our most valuable asset.
This all makes sense, but I keep thinking back to Musk's sports team analogy. Isn't this a global competition for talent? If we're focused on retraining Americans, what's to stop other countries from just poaching the best and brightest from our newly skilled workforce?
That's a great question, and it really highlights why this is such a complex issue. We can't just focus on domestic policies. We need to be aware of the global landscape, and that's where things get even more interesting. So we're talking about a global talent race, right, where countries are practically tripping over themselves to attract the best and brightest. And a lot of countries are realizing that just having open borders isn't enough. They're being a lot more strategic, like tailoring their immigration policies to attract very specific skills and industries. Canada's points-based system is a good example, which we talked about earlier. They're not just looking for anyone, they're looking for people who can contribute to their economy and fill those gaps they have in their workforce.
So it's about figuring out those key industries, the areas where a country wants to be a global leader, and then creating immigration pathways that support that goal.
Exactly. And it's not even just about visas. Countries are also competing on things like quality of life tax incentives, research funding, even access to venture capital. It's like they're creating these ecosystems designed to nurture innovation and attract entrepreneurial talent.
It's just like they're building these talent magnets, using all these different tools to draw people in. So what can America do to compete? Are we in danger of falling behind?
Well, the sources you sent, they paint kind of a mixed picture. On the one hand, America still has a lot going for it. I mean, we've got world-class universities, a strong entrepreneurial culture, and this history of attracting top talent. But we also have some challenges. Our immigration system can be well, slow and bureaucratic. And there's a lot of uncertainty around policies,
Uh-huh.
especially when it comes to those skilled visas.
And we need to be more agile, more
Yeah.
responsive to the changing demands of that global talent market.
Right. And we need to think about how we can make America a more welcoming and inclusive place for immigrants. This goes beyond just policies. It's about creating a culture where people from all backgrounds feel valued and respected.
Because at the end of the day, it's not just about attracting talent, it's about retaining it, making sure people want to stay here, build their lives here, contribute to our society. It's about creating that sense of belonging.
Exactly. And that brings us back to this big question. How do we reconcile these competing narratives
Yeah.
about the American dream? How do we create an economy that works for everyone, that welcomes global talent, while also making sure American workers have opportunities?
It's a tough balancing act, for sure. But the good news is, the sources you sent suggest there are solutions out there. It's about being smart and strategic,
Yeah.
and most importantly, being willing to adapt.
And it's about having a real conversation, a real dialogue
Yeah.
about what kind of future we want to build. This isn't just some policy debate. It's a conversation about who we are as a nation and what we value.
And that's where you, the listener, come in. This isn't just some abstract issue happening in Washington. It's affecting your life, your community, your future. So stay informed, engage in the conversation, and make your voice heard.
Because the choices we make today, well, they're going to determine the kind of world we leave for future generations. Do we want to be a nation that embraces global talent, that sees diversity as a strength? Or do we retreat into ourselves, afraid of the future, clinging to the past?
It's a choice we all have to make. And the more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to make the right decisions, not just for ourselves, but for our country and for the world.
So as you go about your day, as you talk to colleagues, friends, family, think about these issues, talk about them, debate them, because the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create together.
And that's what the deep dive is all about, empowering you with the knowledge and insights. You need to navigate this complex world and be an active participant in shaping your future.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some food for thought and maybe even sparked some conversations of your own.